Okay, we're in Chapter 4, Exercise 4, and let's start building the application. This one's going to be called Blood Data. It says create a class named Blood Data that includes fields that hold blood type. The 4 blood types are, and they give them to you, O, A, B, and AB, and an RH factors, which is positive or negative. And then we are going to create a default constructors that sets fields to O and positive. So in other words, without passing any parameters to it, it's going to instantiate an object that automatically has a blood type of O positive. All right. And then we're going to have overloaded constructors that requires values for both fields. Include get and sets for each, and then save that as blooddata.java. All right, so I'm going to come back over to Eclipse, and I'm going to right-click the source folder, create a new class file. We know it's going to be called blood data. Is this going to have a main method? No, this is just a class file. It's not going to be executable. We're creating a construct here, okay? I'm going to put chapter So, looking again at the description, all right, it's going to have fields for blood type, 4 different possible values, and an RH factor. So for blood type, what type of data type are we going to use? String, right? If we didn't have the AB, we could use character, but we're going to use string. Let's do that. So how should I do this, folks? Private. Oh yeah, we got to give it a name too. Yes. No. No, that's something that we're going to set. All right. The other one was RH factor. Yes. Stick with string. You could technically do it with a character, but let's stick with string. And call this RH factor. The next part of the instruction says create a default constructor that sets the fields to O and positive, respectively. So let's take a look at how we would do that. So we are going to create, inside of here, leave a little space for myself, a public default constructor that is going to use the same name as the class. That's why it becomes a constructor. And it's going to have empty parentheses and the curlies, and then we're just going to do this very simple thing. We can do this 2 different ways. I'm going to demonstrate both. All right. The one, which is the one you'll probably lean towards, would be to do this. Do blood type equals O. We do need our double quotes, so. Yep. And intuitively, that's what I would do too, but I just want to show you a different approach after I complete this. And then, right, it wants us to set blood type to O and RH factor to plus. And this will work just fine. Okay. Now, I'm going to put a little note here to myself because I'm not ready for the alternate approach yet, and you'll see why. All right, so that's the default constructor. Now they want us to do gets and sets for everything. Do you remember how we can do that in Eclipse? You can right-click, source, generate getters and setters.
Or you can just hover over it. There's a create getter and setter. You hover over it.
Right. Now I'm going to go ahead and click it. just so you see what it generates. Yeah, it does. Now, technically, do I need to put the this in? No, but it's considered a safe approach. Okay, so I would expect most of you, if you're hand coding this, that you would give me this. And that's kind of a weird syntax. It does work just fine, but you might choose something like that. Okay, you guys comfortable with this so far? Most of you wouldn't be comfortable with the fact that all the names are the same, but it works just fine. And that works just fine too. But I would prefer, if you're hand coding it, that you use an approach like this. All right, let's do the same thing with RH factor. So I'm just hovering, create getter and setter. Once again, I'm going to remove the this. You don't have to, but I'm going to do that. And let's just use RH for what we're passing it. So we got our getters and our setters, but now we also are going to need, I think, an additional component here, or is that it? Nope, that's it. So we're going to save it. But now I want to show you that alternate approach. Because it doesn't tell us to do this, at least not in this part of the assignment. And what I'm doing now, okay, that's in the next part, and that's why I'm, all right, so it says create a class named patient that includes the ID number, age, and blood data. So this is a separate class file. All right, and this is going to lead me to my other demonstration. So let's go ahead and actually create test blood data so we can see if everything is working correctly. All right, so let's save that. Back up to the source folder, right-click, new class. Test blood data. This is going to have an executable component to it. And how would we go about writing a test program for this? Okay, I missed a piece here, folks, before we get too far, because I did all this. Create a class. It's going to be 4 different blood types. An RH factor, we did that. Default constructor, and an overloaded constructor that requires values for both fields. We didn't do that. Okay, catching that? I'm going back to blood data, so we need to do that part of it. So an overloaded constructor would just basically take public blood data, whatever you want to call it, and now it's going to accept both parameters. So we do a string for type and a string, once again, for RH. And then all those are going to do is the same thing we're doing here with these. In fact, if I named them the same way, so let me name this one BL type, then I can just do a little copy paste. And what I'm hoping is this will actually, I think, demonstrate to you what the concept of this is. Because watch what I'm going to do here. When I do a default constructor, I can just preset those values, right? Or I can do this. And actually, isn't it interesting, when I did this, do you notice that it changed these? when I did like an automatic get and set, it went through and instead of saying blood type equals, it's using the method that's built in to do it. So it's calling the method below, and it changed it automatically for me. So, okay, so really now we're seeing three different approaches. Originally what I had was blood type equals, excuse me, oh, that's what I put in originally. But then when I automatically generated the set and the get, it changed it to set blood type, because what does set blood type do? It takes a value and sets it. Okay, but either way it's going to work. All right, so maybe actually what I should do is let's have all the different approaches in here and I'll comment them out, but that way you can compare all of them. All right. Oops. Okay, so this is what I had originally. And then this one was auto-generated. Okay, and I'm going to tell you I'm going to be commenting this stuff out, just so you know. All right, so this is what we typed originally, that's fine. This is what the automatic thing did inside of Eclipse, that's fine. We're just using the built-in method. And then another approach that I can show you, which I think is really good at explaining what the this concept does, is we have the default constructor, nothing passed in, and then we have the constructor that takes two parameters. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write a thing called this. What's this? What are we inside of? Blood data. Okay, so I'm just going to do this. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to comment all this stuff out. And this will be a little bit of a mind bender initially, okay? Because what this is doing is it's referring to this. This is blood data. But now I'm sending back to myself and I'm realizing, hey, I've got two parameters. I can't do it here, but I can do it here. So instead of coming back to itself, it's coming back to here. I'm going to let you mull that over a little bit because it explains a lot if you think about it. It's referring to itself because that's how you do a default constructor, right? Default constructor refers to itself, but in order to do it, instead of hard coding the values or doing sets, I'm just passing parameters back to the class, which then comes to this constructor and puts them in the right place. Like I said, I'm going to let you mull that over for a little bit. But I showed you three different approaches and all of them work. No, it does not interfere. If I send something in externally, that will operate independently. Remember, this is a class. It's the blueprint. Once we create an object from it, it's unto itself. But what happens is when we create it with a default constructor, it'll get the O and the positive. And then if we send stuff in, then it will just, it'll skip this one, it'll come down here and set it. Right. Now, yes. Now, I'm going to kind of do this in an abbreviated fashion so we can use our time most efficiently. All right, here I'm going to want to write an application that tests this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this little snippet of code here from a completed version that I already have. And so I have a method that's going to be called display. That's going to show our information. And then I'm going to also generate the objects. And I'm going to walk through this, so don't worry. I'll explain. So here we are. This file is sitting in the same folder location as blood data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call upon blood data, an abstract data type, and I'm giving it a name, and then I'm instantiating with the default constructor. It's empty. And when I instantiate it, it's going to come over here. It's going to pass back to itself the O and the positive, which comes down here and sets the data fields. And now this new object called B1 has O positive with it. Then I create another one, which is B2. This time we're sending in the values. So when it comes back to blood data, it's going to grab those two values, drop them here, and now those are part of B2. So now B2 has a negative. Then I have a little display method that I created. What does display receive? Notice what we're sending it? The whole object that we've created. So that whole object gets passed in here, and then we do an output, and because when it enters this method, we take that object and then assign it to a different variable name, but it's still the object that we're sending. We then can use that generic name and then run the method that comes from blood data, the get blood type, to go to the object that we're sending, pull back the information, and then put it up on the screen. So it's going to get the blood type and get the RH factor. Then after we display each one of them, we are then taking a look at setting the values. So we take the name of it and do a B1 set blood type and a B1 set RH factor, which before we just used the default constructor, right? So this time we're taking the one that used the default, and now we're setting values and then displaying it again. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give it a run so we can use our time efficiently, and you guys can go back and watch the video in the aftermath to figure it out. All right, so default constructor runs O positive. This one we sent A negative to it. There it is, A negative. Then we set the blood type for B1, and then we display it all over again, and then we get AB. Okay, so that's part 1 of exercise 4. Let's move on to the next part. Now it says create a class named patient that includes an ID number, age, and blood data. So here's where we are going to create a class whose one of its private data fields is going to be a class. Powerful, very powerful concept here. So let's go ahead and create that file. Let's create a new class. They want us to call it patient. This is not going to be executable. And if it were to, for any reason become executable, then you just add a main method and it would, for the most part, work. All right, so the instructions say that we need to include a string. But it didn't say string. We kind of have to figure that out for ID. Now, why would I use a string for ID instead of a number? Because who's to say that the ID doesn't have letters in it? Plus, we really don't want it, even if it was all numbers, to be something that we would do math with, right? So, and typically in a database, ID numbers are handled that way as well. The other thing they want is the age. So what should that be? Int to age. And there was one other thing they wanted us to do, which was what? Read the instructions. The instructions say name, age, and blood data. So we're adding as an abstract data type now, one that we created, blood data. Let's just call it, so it's not, let's call it blood data. That is pretty cool, isn't it? All right. Now they want us to do some additional steps, and the additional steps are provide a default constructor that sets ID to 0, age to 0, and blood data to O positive. So let's do that part of it. So we'll do a public patient, our parens, some curlies, and now we'll say ID equals, remember it's a string, 0, age, this is an int, so we actually put in a number, 0, and then blood data equals what? This, what? Is that what it said? All right, so provide a default constructor sets the ID number to 0 and the age to 0 and the blood data to O and positive. But I don't have those in here to set them. But they're not strings here, they're strings here. So how would I get a default constructor to operate? Not necessarily, but that's not a bad idea. How did we do it here? Do you guys see where I'm going with this? So watch what's happening here. And this is another one of these real key concepts you guys are being introduced to. Blood data, we declared blood data up here, but we didn't give it any value. But we want to basically use the default constructor here to populate it with O and plus, O positive. So all we have to do is say new blood data, and it becomes O positive. Isn't that cool? Hopefully you got a little bit of like churning going on in your brain now. It's very, very powerful concepts here. Back to the description. Create an overloaded constructor that provides values for each field. So now we're going to copy this, paste it. All right, so we're going to have to send stuff in. So the first thing we're going to send in is a string. And let's just make it all caps. And then age is going to be an int. And here's where it gets tricky. What do we pass in to set the blood data? If we look at what we did here, if we're setting both fields, notice how we're doing it? We're passing two values. Yeah, we have to do the same thing here, but if we're going to send in that constructor, and I'm going to type it out and then you guys will see what I mean by it. So let's just do string B type for blood type, and it was a string for, let's just call it RH. All right, so here I'm going to throw in this. Don't really need to, but I will. I just want to show you how it works. And now we're going to do the blood data again. And we're still going to create a new one because we're constructing. But now we're going to send in the stuff that it needs for itself. So if you remember the order, it was, what are we going to send? The B type, that's what we're sending. And we're sending RH. Now, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I can absolutely just do it this way too. And I expect most of you, if you're coding it, are going to do it that way. Okay. So once again, the default sets the two values and instantiates a new blood data, named blood data. If we overload it and send in the blood type and the RH factor, these two get set as they were before, but now we're also passing parameters and instantiating a new object as we're instantiating a new object. You see the levels here? We're creating a new object, which also creates a new object. Right? But now here's the more interesting part, is that new object is part of the object that we're creating with patient. So the patient is instantiating an object that becomes part of the patient. And if you think about it just from the standpoint of, okay, you're a new patient and you have your own blood type. Mind blown, right? Some pretty deep concepts. But this is the power of object-oriented programming, you guys. This is where it unlocks those keys. Now, we are going to need to have some setters and getters, right? All right, and see, they want to, I think, change everything for us here. All right, so we got the ID. So I'm going to keep the field reference the way it is so it doesn't change our code. It does throw in the this, but that's okay. And we may as well do it for blood data. Now by putting all the getters and setters in there, what that enables us to do is once the patient is created and their blood type is created with them, from an external program, we can change any one of those things. Cool, right? All right. So now we have to do the last part, unless I missed something here. All right, gets and sets, we just did that. And then create an application that demonstrates all of that. All right, and they want us to call that one test patient. So let's create a new class. We're going to call it test patient. We'll have a main method. All right. So once again, for sake of brevity, I'm going to be copying and pasting some code because our time is very quickly waning here in class. And I'm also going to include a method for displaying. Now, provided I named everything the same way, and apparently I did, everything should work just fine. All right, so what we're doing, just to walk through the code, is just like we did with blood data, we're instantiating two new objects of type patient. So we're creating two new patients, P1 and P2. First one uses the default constructor. So the default constructor will ID 0, age 0, blood data, default constructor will be O positive, right? The second patient, we are sending in ID number of 1234, age 35, blood type B positive. So we're instantiating that right off the bat. All right. Then we're also, watch this, creating a blood data object. And I'm going to show you what's going to happen with it. That's kind of cool. All right, so we're creating a new blood data object independent of the patients. That's going to be named B2. We're going to display, in fact, this is something that we could probably do as we add, but the next thing is we're going to display that information. Just like we did in the previous problem, we take the whole object and pass it in, remembering that it has an age, an ID, and the blood type all built in. Right, so we pass that down to display, and then we are going to get the blood data. So watch what we do. We actually declare another object here called BT. We're passing an object named P to it. We're getting the blood data from that and storing it in BT. Now you're going to say, why am I going to that trouble? The reason you're going to that trouble is because it allows it to be generic. It allows it to accept any blood data values and use them. Okay, so then we're just doing some output. We're taking that P that we're passing, we're getting the ID, we're grabbing the age, the blood type is, get the blood type, get the RH factor, but notice how we're doing that. We are grabbing from our patient through the get statement. Well, I didn't mean to do that. All right, let's put it back up here. Through the methods that are built in, the set and the get, we're pulling back the whole object. And then we're using that object coming back here, and then using that to get the blood type and the RH factor. Now, this is one of those things I didn't need to do. It's for sake of demonstration. All right, so then we go through and we demonstrate how to set values for the one that had the defaults. And then we're also setting a new object, and then taking that new object B and assigning it to P1. So it really kind of demonstrates many different concepts all in one fell swoop. All right, let's go ahead and save this. And let's run it. And cross our fingers and hope it runs. All right, so we have, let's see if what we're getting is what we're expecting. So we got patient 1, default constructor, ID 0, age 0, blood type O positive. That's right. With the next display, P2 basically is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a problem here, huh? Or do we have a problem? What's that? All right, so P2, it should be grabbing these values, but it's not. Why is it not? What if I comment this up? Save it, let's run it again. Remember when it does the display, something isn't working quite right. It could, yeah, it could, that could be.
Or something missing for some reason, or because I have it exactly as you do so far.
Okay, so what I'm going to check now is with the overloaded constructor, if I have it set right inside patient, because really what should be happening is this should say 1, 2, 3, 4, and that should say 35. So let's go back to patient and see if we did that part right. We're sending in a string of ID, an integer of age. So ID is going to be program's doing exactly what we're not doing here is this should be because then it'll grab the number we're sending in. You gotta be looking for those things, and now we're gonna set this one to age. All right, so now let's save it and run it again. Run this one again. All right, so now you see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 35. All right, and then the blood type is B positive because that's what we set. And then when we continue on here, we're setting the ID and the age on the first one to 3, 4, 5, 6, and 42. And then we're doing this blood data thing, blood data B. So we have AB negative. Then we're taking P1, setting the blood data to whatever we created in this object and redisplaying it, and see how it changes. Now the question becomes, what are we doing here? No, it's just something that you put in there before for experimentation and never used, basically. Sorry. Don't copy all the code just because it's up on the screen. All right, this is a really nice example of a class that creates an object as it's within itself creates another object, taking the object that it created and the object it's becoming and creating it as one entity. That's really the takeaway here. And when you guys do the next problem, which is the sandwich problem that we don't have time to work on, you're doing kind of the same thing again. That one's got a couple other little things that go with it. I do have a pre-recorded video for that I'm going to post, so you guys have an example to work from. But we are done for the night. We're pushing our boundaries here again. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time.